I had been hiking alone, just as the sun began to set behind the hills. The air was still, not a single leaf rustling, no bird singing its usual song. The path I walked twisted through the glen, bordered by tall, ancient trees whose gnarled roots crisscrossed underfoot. I don't know why, but the deeper I went, the more I felt watched. I chalked it up to nerves or maybe the thrill of solitude, but that feeling gnawed at me. As I reached a clearing near a narrow stream, I heard it. The faintest crackle of dry leaves underfoot, slow and deliberate, just out of view. My heart thudded in my chest as I scanned the tree line. That's when I saw it. At first it was just a shadow, but as the last bit of daylight faded, the shape took form. Tall, too tall for a man, yet bent and hunched in an unnatural way. Its limbs were long, sinewy, and thin, its fingers curling into points like gnarled branches. The thing's body was covered in coarse, matted hair, somewhere between the color of the earth and old, rotting bark. It stepped forward into the clearing, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of its face, half human, half animal. Its eyes were dark pits, its mouth wide, with lips cracked and dry as if it hadn't had water in weeks. But it wasn't the look that frightened me most. It was the way the thing moved. Every step was slow, deliberate, as if it was waiting for me to run. But I couldn't. I was frozen. And then it spoke, just a whisper, but enough to chill my bones. I turned and bolted without looking back. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. To this day, I swear it was real. And every time I walk near the water, I wonder if it's there, waiting, watching. The topic of tonight's episode is the Urisk. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that one or not right, but we'll try it. Called the Urisk. The Urisk, a creature of myth and shadow, dwelling in the wild places of Scotland. Half man, half goat, the Urisk is said to inhabit the most remote corners of the countryside, often near water, streams, lochs, and waterfalls. It's not a creature of overt malevolence, but its appearance is enough to strike fear in those unlucky enough to cross its path. Physically, the Urisk is often described as standing taller than a man, though hunched and twisted in a way that makes its form difficult to pin down. Its upper half resembles that of a withered man, its face elongated with hollow, dark eyes and sharp, cracked teeth. Its lower half is distinctly goat-like, with cloven hooves and shaggy fur that clings to its twisted form. Its skin is rough, coarse, and dirty, often blending into the surrounding wilderness. Some accounts speak of it being covered in mud or moss, as if it rises directly from the earth itself. Though the Urisk's appearance is terrifying, it is said to be a lonely creature. In folklore, it craves human companionship, though its grotesque appearance makes it such an impossible thing. It lurks on the fringes, watching barely as people approach. Legend tells that in ancient times, the Urisk was once a fae or spirit of nature, a guardian of the streams and forests. But as humans encroached upon the wilds, it became twisted, cursed to live a solitary existence, half man, half beast, a reminder of the balance that was broken. The Urisk is often found near water, and this connection to the elements is no coincidence. It's said that the creature draws strength from flowing streams and waterfalls, often emerging at twilight, when the world is caught between day and night. Travelers who have ventured too deep into its domain have reported hearing strange whispers carried on the wind, the soft tread of hooves on moss-covered stones, and sometimes the sound of weeping. Our first encounter comes from Henry, a seasoned backpacker from Perth, who often hiked the remote trails around Loch Lomond. Henry had spent years exploring the wilds and considered himself more than capable of navigating the Scottish terrain, even at dusk. One fateful evening, he decided to make camp near a small stream at the base of a densely wooded hill. The sky turned a bruised purple as night fell, and the sounds of the forest began to settle into the quiet hum of the evening. I had set up my tent and built a small fire, Henry recalls, and I was sitting there, enjoying the stillness. But then, out of nowhere, I felt it, the sense of being watched. First, I thought, it was just my nerves. Just the isolation playing tricks on me. But the feeling wouldn't go away. I started hearing this sound, like something moving, slowly, deliberately, in the woods around me. He strained to see through the shadows cast by the fire, his eyes darting from tree to tree. The sound grew louder, footsteps soft but deliberate, circling his camp. Then, from the corner of his eye, he caught movement. A tall, hunched figure standing at just the edge of the clearing, its body half concealed by the trees. I'll never forget the way it moved. Slow and jerky, like it wasn't used to walking. Its arms were long, too long, and its legs bent in a way that wasn't natural. It was like a nightmare come to life, something twisted between man and beast. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The creature stayed at the edge of the light, watching, its dark eyes reflecting the flickering flames. Henry said he didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he could hear it pacing the perimeter of his camp, never getting closer, but never leaving either. At the first light of dawn, he packed up and left, haunted by the eerie silence that had settled over the forest. Our next account comes from Marie, a local artist who frequented the rugged landscapes of Glencoe. One crisp autumn afternoon, Marie had taken her sketchbook to a secluded waterfall, where she intended to capture the play of light on the water. She was absorbed in her work, her pencil gliding over the page when she felt it, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. I was completely alone, or at least I thought I was, she said, but suddenly it felt like someone was watching me. I looked up, expecting to see a hiker, or maybe even a curious deer, but I saw it was neither. Staying in the distance, partially hidden by the trees, was a figure unlike any that she'd ever seen. It was tall and lanky, its limbs long and twisted, like the branches of an old, gnarled tree. The creature was watching her, its head cocked to one side, in a disturbingly human-like gesture. It was so still, I almost convinced myself it was a tree at first, but then it moved. Its head tilted slightly, and I swear I saw its mouth twitch, like it was trying to speak. I felt a wave of cold panic rush over me, but I couldn't move, couldn't look away. I just sat there, staring at it. Marie finally gathered her belongings, forcing herself to stand. The creature didn't move as she backed away, but its eyes never left her. Even as she hurried down the trail, her heart pounding, she could feel its gaze burning into the back of her head. And then came the sound, the unmistakable crunch of leaves underfoot, as though it was following her, just out of sight. I never saw it again, she said, but I felt it the entire way back to my car. Her voice was still trembling with the memory. I felt its presence in every shadow, behind every tree. I didn't stop until I reached my car and drove away. Then there's Duncan, a fisherman from Oban who had spent his life on the lochs of the Highlands. One evening, Duncan was out late, casting his lines near the shore of Loch Awe, when he saw something strange moving along the opposite bank. At first I thought it was a deer coming down for a drink, Duncan recalls. It was dusk, and the light was fading fast, so I couldn't make it out much more of its shape. But then it stood up, on two legs. Duncan squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The figure was tall, too gangly, and too odd to be human. Yet it moved with an eerie grace, stepping out from the trees and onto the shore. As it neared the water, he could see its lower half, goat-like, with cloven hooves that clicked against the stones. Its upper body was twisted, its arms long and thin, like it had been stretched. Its skin looked rough, like bark, or maybe mud. And its face, oh God, its face. I could barely see it in the fading light, but I knew it wasn't right. Its eyes were sunken, like dark holes in its mouth. It was wide, way too wide. The creature didn't come closer, but Duncan felt a deep, primal fear grip him. He began reeling in his line, desperate to leave, but his hand shook so badly that the fishing line tangled. As he struggled, the creature turned its head toward him, its gaze locking onto his. For a moment, time seemed to stop. I felt like it was waiting, like it knew it couldn't leave until I untangled that line. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it walked back into the trees. But you know what? I didn't stick around to see what was coming back. I left everything, my gear, my lines, and I rode back to shore as fast as I could. To this day, Duncan refuses to fish at Loch Awe after dark. Finally, we have an account of Elsa, a retired school teacher from Inverness. She had spent many summers wandering the hills and glens of her homeland, but one encounter in the Cairngorms left her a story she'd never forget. She had been on a solitary walk near a hidden loch, high up in the mountains, when she came across an old stone bothy, a small, ancient structure half crumbling and covered in moss. She decided to rest for a while inside. It was quiet, she recalls, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring because there's no sound at all. I sat on a stone bench, eating my lunch, when I heard it. Footsteps, heavy and slow, just outside the door. Elsa assumed it was just another hiker, but when she called out, there was no response. The footsteps grew louder, circling the building. She peeked out the small window, and that's when she saw it. A tall, hunched figure, its head nearly scraping the low roof of the bothy as it passed by. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur, and its legs were unmistakably goat-like, ending in dark hooves that clattered against the stone. I could see its face through the window, just for a second. It was wrong, like someone had tried to stretch a human face over an animal's skull. Its eyes were dark and empty, its mouth hung open as though it was trying to speak, but couldn't. Elsa froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The creature continued to circle the bothy for a while, and it felt like hours to her. Finally, it stopped, standing just outside the door. She could hear it breathing, slow, ragged breaths, as she feared it might try to enter. But then, as quickly as it had come, it turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving only the sound of her own heart racing in the eerie silence. I waited until I was sure it was gone, Elsa says, and then I ran. I never walked that fast in my life. I didn't stop until I was miles away. Whatever the thing was, it wasn't meant to be seen by human eyes. Each of these stories paints a chilling picture of the Urisk, a creature that walks the line between nature and nightmare, forever seeking something it can never have. Whether it's a guardian of the wilds or a twisted spirit of solitude, the Urisk's presence in Scottish folklore remains a haunted reminder of the mysteries that linger in the shadowy corners of our world. The Urisk, whether it's a guardian of the wilds or lonely cursed spirit, remains one of Scotland's most elusive and eerie creatures. It's a being tied to nature, yet separated from it, caught in the liminal space between the human and the animal world. For those who've seen it, the experience is the only thing that they'll never forget. The Urisk may not be a creature of malice, but its presence, its unsettling form, and its mournful solitude are enough to leave a lasting impression on all who encounter it. Thank you for listening to tonight's episode of Lunitar's Legends, Lore, and Lies. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Urisk, be sure to follow the podcast for more chilling tales from the depths of the folklore and legend. And remember, next time you're walking near a stream or waterfall, take a moment to listen. You never know who or what might be watching. Until next time, stay curious, but be careful where that curiosity leads you.